If you are over 60 years old, I need you to pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because there is a process happening inside your arteries right now. A silent process, one that does not hurt, one that produces no obvious symptoms at first, and that most people only discover when it is too late. It is called arteriosclerosis. And after the age of 60, it advances in a way that very few doctors explain clearly during a routine appointment. Today I'm going to show you exactly what happens to your arteries as you age, what signals the body sends before the problem becomes serious, and what concrete steps you can take starting today to slow that process down. Stay until the end. What you learn here could literally save your life. First, I need you to understand how a healthy artery works. Arteries are much more than simple tubes through which blood flows. They are living, flexible, and active structures. They have three layers: an inner layer called the intima, a middle muscular layer, and an outer layer of connective tissue. When the heart beats, the arteries expand to receive the blood and then contract to push it forward. That ability to expand and contract is called arterial elasticity, and that elasticity is fundamental to life. But after the age of 60, that elasticity begins to deteriorate at an accelerated rate. The arterial walls become stiffer, less capable of adapting to blood flow, and more vulnerable to the buildup of deposits on the inside. That process of hardening is called arteriosclerosis, and it does not happen overnight. It takes decades to develop. What changes after the age of 60 is the speed at which it progresses and the consequences it brings. Now, there is something many people confuse, and I want to clarify it from the beginning. Arteriosclerosis is not the same as atherosclerosis, although both processes often occur together. Arteriosclerosis is the general hardening of the arterial wall. Atherosclerosis is the buildup of plaques made of fat, calcium, and inflammatory material inside the artery, which progressively narrow the channel through which blood flows. Both processes combined create an extremely dangerous situation. On one hand, the artery loses flexibility and can no longer regulate pressure properly. On the other hand, the internal channel narrows, which forces the heart to work harder to circulate blood throughout the body. The result is chronic arterial hypertension, cardiac overload, and a significantly higher risk of heart attack and stroke. According to the World Health Organization, cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death worldwide, and arteriosclerosis is the underlying mechanism behind the vast majority of those cases. But why does this happen so frequently after the age of 60? There are several factors that combine and accelerate with aging. The first is the reduction in nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide is a molecule produced by the cells of the endothelium, which is the inner lining of the artery. Its main function is to relax and dilate blood vessels. With aging, that production decreases, and without enough nitric oxide, the arteries remain in a state of greater tension, which promotes the progressive hardening of their walls. The second factor is chronic low-grade inflammation. After the age of 60, the immune system enters a state that scientists call inflammaging, a combination of the words inflammation and aging. It is a silent, persistent inflammation that slowly damages arterial tissue. The third factor is accumulated oxidative stress. Over decades, the body's cells produce free radicals as a byproduct of metabolism. Over time, if antioxidant mechanisms are not sufficient, that oxidative damage accumulates in the arterial walls and accelerates their deterioration. And the fourth factor is vascular calcification. With aging, calcium that should normally be in the bones begins to deposit in the walls of the arteries, making them literally harder, less elastic, and more prone to rupture or obstruction. Now, the question I am asked most often is this: how do I know if my arteries are hardening? And the honest answer is, in many cases, you do not. That is exactly the danger. But the body does send signals, and knowing how to recognize them can make an enormous difference. The first signal is arterial hypertension that appears or worsens after the age of 60, especially when the systolic pressure, the top number, rises significantly while the diastolic pressure, the bottom number, stays the same or decreases. That specific pattern is a clinical indicator of arterial stiffness. The second signal is disproportionate fatigue with exertion. If activities you used to do easily, like climbing stairs or walking several blocks, now leave you more exhausted than they should, it may be that your heart is working harder than it needs to in order to overcome the resistance of stiff arteries. The third signal is a pulsing sensation in the neck or temples. When arteries lose elasticity, the pressure wave generated by each heartbeat propagates with greater force through the peripheral vessels. That sensation of a strong, visible pulse can be a sign of advanced arterial stiffness. The fourth signal is erectile dysfunction in men. This may sound surprising, but circulation in the blood vessels of erectile tissue is extremely sensitive to changes in arterial elasticity. Erectile dysfunction is, in many cases, the first cardiovascular symptom to appear, years before a major cardiac event. If you recognize any of these signals in yourself, do not ignore them. Speak with your doctor and request a complete cardiovascular evaluation. Now comes the most important part of this video. What can you do to slow arterial hardening after the age of 60? Modern cardiovascular science has identified several mechanisms that have been proven effective at preserving arterial elasticity and reducing cardiovascular risk in older adults. The first is regular moderate-intensity aerobic exercise. Studies published in the Journal of the American Heart Association showed that adults over the age of 60 who performed between 150 and 180 minutes of brisk walking per week had significantly lower arterial stiffness than sedentary people of the same age. Why does it work? Because aerobic movement stimulates nitric oxide production in the endothelium, increases the flexibility of the arterial wall, and reduces levels of systemic inflammation. You do not need to run, you do not need a gym. Walking at a brisk pace for 30 minutes, 5 days a week, already produces a measurable effect on arterial health. The second mechanism is reducing sodium and increasing potassium in the diet. Excess sodium is one of the main factors that increase arterial stiffness because it retains fluids and raises pressure inside the vessels. Potassium, on the other hand, has a vasodilatory effect and helps counteract the effects of sodium. Foods such as bananas, avocados, sweet potatoes, lentils, and spinach are excellent sources of potassium and should be present in the daily diet of every person over 60 years old. The third mechanism is blood sugar control. Chronically elevated glucose directly damages the arterial endothelium. Each episode of hyperglycemia generates inflammation and oxidative stress in the arterial walls. For this reason, even in people without a diagnosed diabetes condition, maintaining stable glucose levels through diet and physical activity is essential for arterial health. The fourth mechanism is quality sleep. During deep sleep, the body produces growth hormone, reduces cortisol levels, and activates cellular repair mechanisms in the endothelium. Recent studies have shown that chronically sleeping less than 6 hours per night is associated with a significant increase in arterial stiffness, independent of other risk factors. If you have difficulty sleeping, this is not a minor problem. It is a cardiovascular factor that deserves medical attention. And the fifth mechanism, which many people underestimate, is the management of chronic stress. Cortisol, the stress hormone, has a direct vasoconstrictive effect. When cortisol levels remain chronically elevated, the arteries stay in a constant state of greater tension, which accelerates the hardening process. Practices such as diaphragmatic breathing, mindfulness meditation, or simply dedicating daily time to activities that generate genuine well-being have a real and measurable impact on cardiovascular health. I want to close this video with something I consider very important. Arteriosclerosis is not an inevitable destiny. It is a biological process that can be slowed down significantly with the right lifestyle changes. None of the mechanisms I mentioned today requires expensive medications or complicated interventions. They require consistency, information, and the decision to take your health seriously, and you are already making that decision. The fact that you stayed until the end proves it. In the next video, I am going to talk about the specific tests you should ask your doctor to run in order to evaluate the current state of your arteries. Many of those tests are simple, affordable, and provide extremely valuable information that most people never think to request. Save this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next video. And tell me in the comments, have you had your blood pressure checked recently? What was the result? See you in the next video.